it is such a huge scene. This is something we don't learn about, but Taiwan during the 90s, it was one of the biggest video game producers on the planet. Like you could put, like, say, uh, Japan, United States, and Taiwan right after, not much behind. I would say Taiwan made more computer RPGs than the US ever made.
Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm Jeremy, and I want to welcome you back to GG Everybody, your ultimate pop culture podcast where we hit start on all things geek. From video games and comic books to tabletop RPGs, tech trends, and beyond, we're here to level up your fandom. Whether you're a console warrior, a dungeon master, or just someone who loves diving deep into geek culture, we've got something for you. Each episode, we tackle the biggest topics, hot takes, and hidden gems across your favorite fandoms. So grab your dice, charge your controllers, and get ready to geek out. Alan, unfortunately, could not join us today. Wish Alan recovery. He's injured himself and needing to get some bed rest. So, uh, thoughts and prayers to Alan. But I am very excited to welcome our guest today, Felipe Pepe, who is the editor and author of the CRPG book. Felipe, thank you so much for taking some time today.
Hello, Jeremy. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. So typically, before we dive into some of the topics of the day, I like to chat a little bit with our guests, learn a little bit more about their backgrounds, et cetera. And so, I guess for you, Felipe, where did you get started with your journey in gaming? Was it on a computer? Was it on a console? And yeah, what kind of got you started on your gaming journey?
I started originally in consoles, in the NES, but because it was Brazil, we didn't have the original one. We had the Phantom system, which was like the bootleg version of
Oh no.
the NES. It was fine. It plays the same.
Okay. Okay.
But then I went to the Amiga computer, which was also like, because it's Brazil, like it was actually illegal to own foreign computers at the time because of the military dictatorship. So it was like,
Wow.
yeah, it was a very dark time for us. So
Yeah.
it was, we had to smuggle one in. So that was my first experience with like a computer was playing on Amiga that was illegal in the country.
Oh, no. Like, were there ever any close calls of, like, having it, like, discovered or, like, were having, like, keep it under wraps or anything like that?
No, it's the kind of thing like we use only for like, my father was an engineer, so he used only
Mm.
for like personal projects, and like, let's say he never took out of the house. And it's not like people say like, oh, he has a computer, so let's arrest him. The tricky part is bringing in, once he's
Mm.
in is easier.
Yeah, I see, I gotcha, okay. So, since once you got it over and in the house, it wasn't really a big deal. It was, and, it was sort of your computer, and that was
Yeah,
that.
the problem was getting games because that was also illegal. So we had like a whole network of people who like, oh, I actually own like a floppy copy of like this game, and people would like meet to copy those games and the software. It was a very unusual setup for gaming.
That's fascinating. And so this was the result of the dictatorship there. Like, was it mainly just about kind of like trying to preserve the culture? Or like what was sort of the thinking behind the stringentness around video games and about bringing in certain computers, et cetera?
The whole idea was, we was like market protection. So the idea was like you shouldn't bring machines from the outside because we can make our own. But the ones that we made was like you never heard about, let's say, Brazilian computers. The ones
Right.
that we
Yeah.
made were like very simple. They were like mostly like Apple II clones, which, let's say, in the early 80s was maybe kind of okay. But then when we reached like the late 80s, early 90s, they were like garbage, and we were like way behind the technology. And it only ended in 1993. So until 1993, it was forbidden for you to import foreign computers into Brazil.
Wow. That's fascinating. So And but you're not currently in Brazil, right? You're in Japan. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what led you to going from Brazil to Japan?
Yeah. Well, first, I am also like a big otaku, so I always had like a bit of that fascination for Japan. Like I grew up watching the anime and all that. But also, I have a friend of mine who she managed to get a scholarship to come to Japan. There is the Mombuka Gakusho, which is kind of like a scholarship for you to do like a master's or a PhD here in Japan. And she
Mm.
got that, and everything is paid by the government. I came to visit her in 2012, and I was like, "Oh, this is wonderful! Like, this is such an amazing place to live." Like, because instead of coming as a tourist, I basically live with her for like a while,
Uh-huh.
and then when I come back to Brazil, I was like, "Okay, that was wonderful." And Brazil was going through like a very dark time. We were having like a lot of like political unrest. Let's say we had like a coup and a bunch of things like this. So I decided, okay, things are too heated up in Brazil right now, and Japan
Right.
looks amazing. So I managed to go to Japan as a language student, and I've been here for now 9 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Um, yeah, that's really fascinating. I've had friends who have gone out there on the JET program, right? So it is really it's really encouraging and interesting, really, the ways that Japan opens their doors to visitors from all around the world and opening those pathways, right? Like for more permanent residency by inviting in scholars, by inviting in people who are willing to, teach and learn and that sort of thing. And so that sounds that sounds great. That's awesome. Um, but okay, so we got a bit of your background starting in gaming consoles, in kind of a more stringent environment in Brazil, and then you had an opportunity to go to Japan, visit a friend who was doing a school program there, and then you say, "Hey, this is a great idea. I'm going to come out there and live there." But in between all of that, somewhere in that journey, right? Uh, there was sort of the beginning and creation of the CRPG book. So, for those who aren't familiar, what is the CRPG book? What is this?
So the CRPG book is a crowdsourced project that we made. It's completely free. It's a book that tells the story of the entire computer role playing genre, all the way from like 1974 when we had like the first prototypes on the mainstream computers, all the way to 2019 when we finished the last version. And it's over 400 games that we tell the story. And it was written by me and a bunch of like collaborators. So what we did is that we created a list of like these are the most important games, most important CRPGs ever made. These are the most interesting ones, the obscure things, the cool ideas that didn't work out. And we went around and said, like, can you write about this? And we went trying to find people who had interesting things to say about all of them. Because, some of them are like, everyone wants to talk about Skyrim or The Witcher 3. But then you get into some really obscure, like, there is one that I always bring up because I think is one of the most fascinating cases of like really obscure game, which is called. Let me get the name here because sorry I forgot.
No, it's
Alternate
fine.
Reality.
Okay.
So there is this game called Alternate Reality: The City, which is a game for um, the Atari 8-bit, which is like an obscure computer for the early 80s. And it was written by an engineer who had worked on the US stealth bomber project. So the guy was like really good at the technology part. He was like a genius. And he made this game, which is like extremely visually advanced. It was supposed to be a huge epic where you are taken by a spaceship into a city in space and you explore the city. He wanted to make a whole saga. So it will be several games, each of them like one you explore the city, one explore the dungeon. It was like a 5 game saga. He never finished it. So he only did like 2 games, but they are like so fascinating, so much ahead of their time. And I was like, I want someone to talk about these. But like, they're extremely obscure. No one knows about them except one guy who was actually trying to do a remake in Unity. So we try to find those sequels, the person who like is obsessed about a certain obscure game, and like
Right.
tell us why you like this game, why this game is so meaningful. So the whole book is a compilation of this, of like over 600 pages of people talking about the best games that they ever play, like why they like these obscure games. Even let's say maybe it's not a great game for you to play, but like watching about it, learning about it is really fascinating.
Yeah. Now, is this project, is it online? It looks like you've published at least one version, right? Like a hardcover version, but are there ways to access the contents of this digitally, or is it mainly just in the book format?
No, there's two formats. One of them is digitally. So if you go to, we have an online website for this, like the CRPG Book. Just type on Google, is a WordPress blog. If you go there, you can download the whole book for free. It is like a crowdsourced project, so like we made the whole thing freely available for everyone.
Hmm.
And then after we published the online version, I came into contact into Bitmap Books, and they wanted to publish a physical version. So that's when we did the hardcover version of the book, which is still for sale with Bitmap Books. And it's because the whole project, is a non-profit. All the profit that we take out of the sales of the hardcore book, we donate to a charity. So it's the whole thing like this can only be possible if you have a non-profit project, because to get like over 150 people to collaborate on a book, it has to be like a non-profit project, because I'm not going to share like we get like I don't know like $10. How do you share this between 150 people?
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
yeah, so
everybody gets a nickel. Yeah.
yeah, it's not worth for everyone. So like
Right.
it's so cheap to like let's make it something free, something that everyone can enjoy, and it has worked really well because the book sells well, but also we got over 100,000 downloads on the PDF. So like I'm super happy with how it went.
Yeah, that's amazing. While you were working on this, any surprising discoveries? I know you mentioned the alternate reality as an example of kind of maybe the more niche or less exposed games that you got to dive into. But were there any other really cool gems that you discovered in the process of like working with other people and like putting the articles together? Yeah, anything really interesting that you found that you think back now and you're like, wow, I can't believe that that game actually got made, or that we were so close to having this game and then it just never came to fruition.
I think the most interesting thing that I came across with, which is something that we don't talk much about, and I'm really happy that the book helped people learn more about this, is the whole scene about Taiwanese and Korean RPGs. Because this is something that like I mentioned on the book. I created a whole section about this because the book had two versions. The first one came out in 2019, and I was like,
Mm.
okay, this is really nice, and it's like it tells the whole story about like the Western RPGs. Also talks about some Japanese ones that has some like overlap with the same culture. And then some people start to contact me saying like, oh, you should talk about this game as well. And
Right.
I got a lot of contacts from China. They telling about like their childhood games, and then I start to investigate them, and it is such a huge scene. This is something we don't learn about, but Taiwan during the 90s, it was one of the biggest video game producers on the planet. Like
Mm.
you could put like say uh, Japan, United States, and Taiwan right after, not much behind. I would say Taiwan made more computer RPGs than the US ever made. Just in
Wow.
that time in the 90s. It's like an insane amount of, and still they made so many classics, so many great games that like most of them were never translated into English. So they never left like the Asia. But you play them today like either with fan translations or like using uh, automatic translation. They are such good games. They hold up so well next to the Western classics. So I made an entire section at the end of the book talking only about like these games. So I talk about like expanding the canon. So it has a lot of French RPGs, Chinese RPGs, and Korean RPGs that we usually don't talk about, but they're like really high quality stuff that I think should be put among the classics. You have something like Fallout, Might and Magic, Ultima. I think you should put some of the Asian series there. Like for example, Chinese Paladin is a series that's still ongoing. They made like
Mm.
over 10 of those. They are considering like in China great classics. They're like one of the biggest like If you go in Taiwan to this day, they think, okay, this is one of the best things our country ever made, like in terms of like pop culture. It influenced. No, seriously,
Wow,
they
that's
made
amazing.
that. The game is so popular, the series, that they later adapted into a TV series, and that TV series is still going. Like they're still making those. Last year, they made a complete remake of the TV series. So, like, imagine how we got, the Witcher TV series on Netflix.
Hmm.
They got that 20 years ago based on the game. And last
Wow.
year they made a whole remake and it was a success again. So like you see, it's really like influential for them. And we don't talk about those. So I was really happy that I could find out about those from people reaching out to me. And then I spoke with them, I played those games, and we made that huge section at the end of the book that addresses those games. And I think that's, let's say, is the most interesting discovery out of working the project.
Yeah. No, that's such a great point. I think as it happens so often, right? I think when you're in, especially in the United States or in Japan, right? Like when you're in these markets that are pretty well known for their contributions to video games, you think like this is it, right? Like this is the entire market. Like maybe, there's a back and forth between like Japan and the United States, but you don't necessarily see that broader vision of, well, no, like people are making video games all over the world, right? And I think the recent success of Clair Obscur has definitely helped to shine a spotlight on that, to say like, hey, studios are making games everywhere, and these games that other studios are making are also phenomenal. uh, but yeah, I think the idea that Taiwan in the 90s was such a powerhouse, I think would definitely be missed by a lot of people, unless they have the privilege of digging into your book and learning more about that. So that's really interesting. Um, I'm curious, that obviously we're in an era, an ever increasing era of digitization, right? We're moving away from analog in a lot of ways. And so, I'm curious what your thoughts are on, the how we go forward with the preservation of these games. Like I'm sure some of the CRPGs that you were researching from the 70s, et cetera, must have been was probably pretty hard maybe to find people who were familiar with the game, or had the pieces of paper with like the hand drawn maps and stuff on them, and all those other things, because preservation is an active thing that needs to happen, right? Like if you aren't conscientious about those things, then it's very easy for the process of development for these games to just kind of disappear, and the history of these games to disappear. And so, just curious, in either, in working on the CRPG book and maybe just reflecting on recent developments, like what are your thoughts on how we can maintain like the preservation of games and gaming history?
That's a very deep topic. I think the one of my biggest worries, and is actually part of why I wanted to make the book, is that I don't trust digital in the sense of like, I'm very happy that most of those games I can play on the book. I think like actually every single game on the book can be played, and I probably have a copy of them archived, but the information around it is missing. It's like disappearing slowly, which
Right.
is part of the point of making a book. Because as much as we have a bunch of websites and we have the Internet Archive, those are disappearing as well. The Archive is like a huge blessing. It's like our library of Alexandria, but it has one trick. That like, if you want to find information on it, you usually need to have the original URL. Like, let's say you're not going to go on Google and search for an interview that was made, let's say, on GameSpot 20 years ago and it was taken offline. It's not going to appear on Google. You need to find the original URL and put that on Internet Archive. So that's part of like making a book format, and also now a hardcover book, which really helps because a lot of the content and the information that is on that book is now not available online anymore. So, like a bunch of interviews, a bunch of quotes, a lot of information there. If you go on the reference of the book, they're now online, they're now offline. Like a lot of already vanish. So, I think having a book, physical thing, helps preserve that because people are dying, like in the sense of like a lot of those original pioneers of the people who were making those games in the 70s, they're getting very old. Some of them are dying already. So we are going to lose that information, and I think it's really important to now reach out to those people and say, okay, can you tell us more about what the process of making those games or playing those games? That is something that I wanted to preserve, and I think is a good contribution of the book. Because even some
Yeah.
small details, you talk about, let's say, there are games from, like, let's say, Wasteland, the the game from Interplay, which is one of the main inspirations for Fallout. That is a
Mm.
really important game that you can go today on Steam, on GOG, download the game, and even play it with like remastered graphics and all that. But that is not the original experience. And the original experience had a bunch of like particularities. For example, it would take a long time to load. It will have autosave if you do something bad, but it takes a while to write into the floppy disk. So people would, let's say, go exploring or like make a bad choice, die, and then they will try to remove the floppy from the computer before the game can autosave the mistake that they made. So this kind of information of like how it was to actually play those games on original hardware, you're only going to get this, like that culture surrounding the game, if you talk to the people who were playing those games back then. So this is something that I wanted to preserve as well. Like a lot of the people who talk about the games in the 70s and the 80s, they're much older people. I have some
Yeah.
grandpas telling the
Yeah.
stories about like how it was to play, you know, the original wizardry and stuff like this. So
Hmm.
I think that sort of experience, because you talk about preservation, there's a lot of things to preserve. You can preserve the game, you can preserve the box art, you can preserve the interviews, but how they were played and how was the culture around them, I think is also like very important.
Yeah.
So
No.
there's
No.
many layers, and I think the much as much as we can take it out of the internet, not relying on like every single website being there forever, I think is very valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I studied history in college. I actually got my master's degree in Japanese history, and so I was in a number of conversations with members of my cohort who were going to do their PhD, and they were going to go to Japan and do research. And of course, a big part of that, to your point, is interviewing people, right? Like going to these like remote villages and areas and finding like the oldest people there and basically saying like, hey, what, do you remember when this happened? Do you remember who was here? Do you remember, all these things? And yeah, I mean, it's something that certainly is difficult to pin down, and that's why this work is so important, right? The idea that we can go and still talk to folks that were at the essentially the founding of modern gaming as we know it. We still have an opportunity to talk to these folks and see, what was informing them culturally, what was informing the market economically, politically, right? And that's all really important context when you look at the history of gaming in general, right? Because otherwise, if you just look at it in a vacuum, you're like, why why were certain things being done? You can't really get that full picture unless you have the human story, right? And I share your concern that the that there will be a trend or a continuing trend, like this idea that we'll have information and no knowledge, right? Like especially in the growing Gen AI world and that sort of thing, where it's like, oh, I can just ask, a chat bot, right? Like, tell me about Atari, right? And it'll spit out facts, right? But it won't necessarily have all of the context of being able to talk to somebody who worked on Atari, localized Atari, like, whatever the case might be. And those human stories are so essential when it comes to history in general, whether you're talking about video games or you know right, any subject of history, right? So
Yeah, like you're talking, like it's. I fear that we have a bit of like an anachronic view of history when we go back, like with the knowledge that we have today, because even until, like I say, the mid 80s, the concept of like CRPGs, of like role playing game as a genre, was not defined. They usually
right.
used to call it like fantasy games, and they would mix adventure games together. So if you go back in history and like you see it, you see the genre forming itself in a way that, like, if you try to fit what we call today RPG into games from the 80s, it doesn't fit. Like
Mhm.
most of them of people today will say like, oh, RPGs are a game about like choices, like Mass Effect and stuff like this. When you go back to like Wizardry has no story, has no choices. Like, so it's very interesting to try to capture that thing of like what it felt like playing this game back then compared to someone from today playing it and saying like, oh, this is a game that plays like this and is an RPG because of this.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Um, all right. Well, thank you so much for kind of giving us a bit of an overview. Again, you can find the CRPG book on Bitmap Books, and they've got a lot of really great products. To be honest, I haven't really um, checked out this vendor and publisher before, but they've got some really cool stuff. Like they also have the Ultimate Guide to Side-Scrolling beat 'em ups with Go Straight, and GBA Pixel Book, and a lot of other really, I mean, honestly, they're just look really well put together, and it's $48, right, USD, for the book, and for something so meaty with all of the beautiful images and screenshots, and just it looks like it was put together very well, and so um, I think I need to add this to my library. So
Well, thank
I'm
you.
looking forward. I'm looking forward to doing that, and I would definitely encourage our listeners to go and check it out. If nothing else, this looks like it would be a fantastic gift idea. If you've got the nerd in your life and you don't know what to get them, this seems like the perfect thing to have wrapped up for a birthday or holiday. So, um,
And just a shout out, if you're not much into computer RPGs, we have also a sister project, which is the JRPG book made by Kurt Catala from Hardcore Gaming 101. One. So, like,
mm,
no matter if you like Baldur's Gate or if you like Final Fantasy, we have both versions for you.
sounds good. Um, all right. Well, we have a few other topics I wanted to chat with you about. So starting with Sony's live service strategy. And so this is something that I know Alan's not here, but he's probably somewhere shaking his fist, because long ago when Sony first announced their kind of pivot to adapting and developing like 12 different live service games, as a part of a broader ongoing strategy at the time. And I know we weren't the only ones. There were a lot of people that did not like this news. But at the time we were saying, this doesn't sound like a winning formula, right? This doesn't sound like that it makes sense, because when you have a live service game, right? We have a few already that have taken off, right? And these are the games that other companies do desperately want to emulate. They want a Fortnite, right? They want an Apex Legends. They want a game like that. Roblox, Minecraft, right? They want a game like that in their library to make oodles and oodles of money on. Um, and and so they're trying to basically ramp up and create these games. But the problem is, when you have a good live service game, and this has been my argument from the beginning, if you do it very well, like that's all that somebody is going to play, right? Like if you got folks who love Fortnite, that's pretty much all they play, right? And so there's not much room, there's not much bandwidth, right, to like try and get more of the market, because you're basically going to like cannibalize from one project to the next. If you're developing 12 different live service games, or if you're attempting to, at some point you're basically saying, we know we're going to basically be taking from our own pool of players to move from one project to the other, right? And so I just didn't think that it was going to work out. And so far, I feel like that's played out the way that we expected it to, in that we've had so many cancellations, and so many bumps in the road with this. And the most recent one, of course, was that Jade Raymond, who was the game producer behind Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs, has left Haven Studios, which is a studio that she founded in 2021, which was working on Fair Games, which is the live service PvE heist shooter. Um, so I don't know, that was kind of my rant there, and that was kind of the most recent piece of news. But I'm curious, Felipe, like from where you're standing, like, and obviously you're in Japan, so I'm curious if you're hearing different elements of this conversation. Like, what do you think of Sony's strategy around live service games, and do you think it's possible for them to execute on it well?
I agree with like what you say, and also I think it has been said like by a lot of people, uh, based on that, on a lot of reports actually, but this is all because of that boom that we saw during COVID, and then a lot of like people who want to a lot of how called the shareholders saying like, okay, we want infinite growth, infinite profit, and this is the way. Like you said, they are all chasing that big forever gain, the big black hole that's going to everyone's going to be playing forever, but there is just not enough time for everyone. There is just not only those are like super risky projects, but there was that survey that came out a while ago talking about how the biggest competitor to video games is not other games, but it's now TikTok, because people
Mm-hmm.
just spend their whole time using that. And I think this is like what they are all hitting against. Like you can make like an amazing game, but you're still like people are still stuck playing those games like Fortnite. People have been playing Fortnite for so long, and they have like so much like invested. They have a community there. They have so much of like the skins that they collected, all that. To
Mm-hmm.
drag people away from that, another game is actually much easier for them to go to, let's say, to TikTok, to another hobby, to a completely different thing,
Yeah.
because these are more like casual people. These are not like the sequels like us who like, oh, I'm playing like, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 games in a year. These are people who
Right.
play like one or two. So if they're abandoning their big one, they're either going to another fad for a while. Let's say like, oh, the how's called that drug dealing game that came out this month and is going super popular on Steam. Either that, or they're going to, let's say, go to another hobby. They're going to watch a TV show. They're going to go on TikTok. So it's not sustainable. Like, and you see now a lot of those movements in the big publishers of like canceling projects, closing studios. They're not based on like making a good game. It's just based on like how we can make the shareholders happy. How can we grow the market value of the company, even if it's just for one quarter. So I'm
Right.
really like, I think everyone has been like very gloomy about how the situation is, and I'm also like very negative about how things are, at least for AAA studios. I don't see anything good coming out of it. The since we're talking about Sony, like the former president of Sony was talking about this week how dumb money got into the way of the industry and like screw things up very badly, because people just want, they don't want long term, they just
Mm-hmm.
want to put their money and see the growth go super high like in one quarter, then remove the money and go to something else like AI or whatever the hell is giving the
Yeah.
highest profits. So I think it's a very bad scenario for everyone.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm curious. I wanted to circle back on the, being in Japan. Like, do you hear anything like as far as like the, I know you can't really paint with a broad brush and be like this. I'm speaking for the entire, Japanese gaming community, but I'm just curious. Like, do you feel as though the, the gaming community in Japan are they equally invested in something like Fortnite or Apex Legends or those like live service games, or do you feel like there's a bit more of a distribution of folks who do play 15 or 20 games a year? Like, do you feel like there's still a bit of diversity in the average like Japanese gamers, you know, play style or playtime, or do you think they have a similar kind of structure as we're seeing like in the US where it's like, no, we have 60% of gamers or 70% of gamers that just play one game and that game is like Fortnite or one of the big live service games.
I think it's also like very focused on that, but different games. It's not as much Fortnite. That is something like a lot of big mobile games that don't even make it to the West.
Mm.
So a survey came out like I think like 2 months ago of like how many people spend so much money, like especially young people spend a lot of money on gacha games, and they actually
Mhm.
regret it, but like they're like very addicted to it. So I think it's a similar scenario in the sense like in Asia in general, they have a lot of more like um, let's say more acceptance into gacha and mobile games, and you see like a lot of pitch on this. Is actually when I was studying the history of games to write the book, you can see how like one of the most influential games in the history of Japan that we don't even talk about in the West is Puzzles and Dragons, which is that like
Mm.
match three kind of like It's a match three game that is also gacha that has like some monsters for you to play. And a lot of people say like that is the game that basically saved the Japanese gaming. It saved and doomed at the same time because they had no money. Like they were crashing because of the PlayStation 3 being so expensive to develop.
Mm,
They were like, okay, only big studios can make games now. We have like some tiny indies. Then you see mobile and you see like Puzzles and Dragons making a ton of money, and they all shift to that. And at least let's say they have a branch of the company making that and earning a lot of money. So it's ever since then it has been like one of the pillars of like the Japanese industry has been gacha games.
mhm.
And I think you talk to people here, they worry much more about gacha games than about something like Fortnite. Is a
Yeah,
different outlook on the industry.
interesting. Yeah, I you mentioned you're an otaku, and did you watch Odd Taxi?
Sorry,
Have you heard of the show Odd Taxi?
no.
No? Okay. Um, I would recommend it. It's a really good show. It's basically has a bunch of anthropomorphic like animals, and the main guy is like a basically like a walrus who's a taxi driver, and there's all these different animals and stuff. But it's actually a very like serious show, and there is a subplot about one of the characters who has like an addiction, like an addiction to a gacha game, or not a gacha game. It's more like an addiction to like a hobby of like collecting like erasers and stuff. And then there's also like a gotcha game as well. Like basically just kind of showcases their addictive personality. And yeah. But anyways, on Taxi, really good. You should check it out. But okay. Let's see. I know I don't want to keep you for too long because I know you have a hard stop. So I think the other thing I'd be interested in getting your thoughts on is the recent success of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, um, because of course this is an RPG that was independently developed by a very small team with Sandfall Interactive and published by Kepler, I believe, and it came, but it was developed in France, right? And so going back to the earlier topic of conversation around like, hey, there's like Japan, there's US, and that's pretty much it. But this game has really sort of provided an additional lens uh, and avenue, basically, of saying like, no, like there are other international studios. And so, curious, first of all, have you had a chance to check out Clair Obscur? What you think of the game? Um, have you had a chance to do so yet?
Yeah, I'm playing it. I'm still like very early on, but it's really good game.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm definitely enjoying it. Um, and I'm interested because, the the kind of double-edged sword when an indie game gets like when it comes out and it's really, really good, right? Um, is that on the one hand you there's a sort of celebration to say like, yeah, like look at these tiny studios, they're able to get it done, they're able to make these amazing beautiful games, um and and then they kind of like people use it to like kind of beat the AAA studios over the head with for a while, right? Like, why don't we get this from Ubisoft anymore or whatever? But on the other side of it is now sort of like the moving sort of a moving goalpost for other indie studios, right? Where it's like, okay, now if you're an indie studio, like our expectation for you is now higher, right? Our expectation for you now is like kind of Clair Obscur. I mean, maybe not that intense, but do you feel that that's the case? Like, do you think that when we have a really strong indie showing, like with Clair Obscur, that it can maybe give the wrong impression of how other indie studios should perform and develop.
My worry with Clair Obscur, and this has been like reported a lot, is that I honestly wouldn't call it indie because like when you talk about like indie game like made with like low resources, I'm thinking about like something, let's say like a team of like I don't know up to 5 people. But
Mm, mm,
the Clair Obscur team is huge. Like
mm.
if you look at the credits of the game, not only let's say the main team, but also how many people they outsourced it, how many people were involved in the publishing, motion capture, voice acting. It is a huge team. I think is they're more something like let's say like a double A studio or something like this. It
Right.
reminds me of something like let's say CD Projekt when they were doing like The Witcher 2, or even let's
Mm,
say um, the team who did Kingdom Come Deliverance, like when they did the first one. I think
Right.
it's
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
of that. It's like, let's say, or even let's say Larian Studios when they did Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 before they ballooned to make Baldur's Gate. I think it's something more like that. And I love having that sort of like double A studio because some of my favorite games are made by studios like this. Like I think Obsidian Entertainment is probably like the best example of something like this before they were purchased by Microsoft. So when they
Mm-hmm.
were doing like those very weird games like Alpha Protocol, Neverwinter Nights 2, even Fallout New Vegas, I
Mm-hmm.
think when we're talking about like the team who did Clair Obscur, it's almost kind of like that. I feel like something like early Obsidian. So I think the potential that they show is like is a much cheaper game to make than something like let's say like a GTA or like even like a Cyberpunk. They're kind of like big triple A budget game.
Right.
But I
Open
also think
world and all that stuff. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, this is not the Baldur's Gate 3 in that sense.
Yeah.
But I also think it's like it's kind of unfair to put any kind of like indie game against it because like this is not the those games made like by five people on Steam. Like so many good games like this came out recently that I really enjoyed, but I don't think like anyone can compete against that unless they have like a lot of investment and a lot of know-how behind them.
Yeah. And that's the tricky thing, right? Is like the prevailing narrative that you see out in on the internet, right? Is that this game was made by like 35 people. Right. And so like that's sort of, when you go and they're like, oh, how did they make Clair Obscur? Like Sandfell's only like this many people or whatever. But to your point, like the actual full roster of folks that they utilized, the outsourcing, et cetera, is larger, much larger. And so again, this is where like the knowledge versus, or the information versus knowledge comes in, right? Where it's like, okay, are now people are kind of taking that away to be like, okay, like Clair Obscur was made by a tiny team. It's almost like, there was sort of the controversy around Dave the Diver being
Yeah,
and being categorized as indie, right? Because it was being made by Nexon, or it was like a subdivision of Nexon, which is a massive company. And so, I think it is tough because I feel like indie has become such a broad category now where it's like if it's not one of the big studios, it's indie, but that's not necessarily true or fair. And actually, to your point, we should be making more space for more double A studios to like recognize, like, okay, like, yes, there are tiers, right? Like, we've got, like Sony Santa Monica, and we've got like these big first party studios that like deliver triple A 100 million, 200, 500 million games, right? Like that's what they do. But then there should be tiers beneath that. And we just lack the nuance, right? Like we have no capacity for nuance in the year of our Lord 2025. And so it's either you're a huge studio or you're indie. And I think that's what's doing a disservice, right, to the industry in a big way.
yeah, and I think part of it is because like the triple A has become so huge. Like how many people? Like there are thousands of people working on GTA. So you look at
Yeah.
something like let's say, oh, Clair Obscur is 35 people. That seems small, but 35 people like until let's say like the 2000s, 2000, even I don't know 2005, something like this. That was a major game already.
Yeah.
So how many like say how many studios alive today have 35 people like full-time employees?
Right.
I think like very little because I honestly I don't like this sort of like erasure of outsourcing. You look at the game like another one that came out was like the Oblivion remaster.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
go
Yeah. Mhm.
they made that trailer and it was like, oh, welcome to France, and it was like the guy like in France talking about welcome to Paris, the guy in France talking about how they made a whole remaster of the game, and he shows like a bunch of people saying what was their favorite aspect of the game. You go into the credits, the credit of the game is gigantic and it's like 10 minutes just scrolling of like Asian names, none of which was shown in the video. So
Sure.
you're like, all those assets were made by a lot of people that cost a lot of money. So you're taking a team of like, let's say 300 people, and you're saying like, oh, we had 300 people on the team, but like only 10 were like full-time employees. So it's a team of 10 people. Like, I think it's
Yeah.
very misleading and it leads to like this bad interpretation of things. I don't I think it's a big issue, and I talk about this coming from a country like Brazil, which is known for like outsourcing. We have some very good outsourcing studios there, and you see the people who work there saying like, "Oh, I work on this game. I made this asset." I'm friends with people who work like in some of those studios, and they're super proud of their work, but like no one even knows that they work on those projects. Like Horizon Zero Dawn had a lot of assets made in Brazil, so but no one talks about this, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And again, it's part of the, we are such a global economy and workforce, and the tools that we have now. I mean, I think about this, probably like once or twice a month at least, but like thinking about COVID, right? Like if COVID hadn't happened in 2020, like how much more impactful, right? That may have been or may not have been, right? In terms of the spread of information, et cetera. But like we had the rough structure in place to allow people to work remotely, right? We were able, so a lot of, you know, blue collar, not a blue collar, but like white collar, like professional jobs, were able to say, okay, we're going to have our workforce, we're going to give them a laptop, they're going to work from home, and that kind of triggered this whole shift or whatever. And schools kind of awkwardly tried to adopt virtual learning, right? Like all these things that happened, but and I didn't, of course, they didn't happen very smoothly, and there was obviously a lot of turmoil and a lot of issues globally, but at least there was some sort of framework for it, right? Like if this happened in 1990,
Yeah,
right? um like where we had just enough internet and communication for it to have got to get out quickly, but not enough infrastructure in place to allow people to like do any sort of helpful work at home, like it would have been like worlds worse, right? Like it would have been like really, really impactful, I think, to the global economy. Either that or, the elites would have just let a lot more people die. One or the other. But so I think about that a lot, and that just kind of makes me think more about like when it comes to gaming, right? Like when it comes to the video game development, like it's that trick of, like you said, full-time employees versus like the contract work, right? Versus all of the various hands that went into it. And that of all the names that you see probably on those credits, there are likely hundreds more that aren't on there. Right? That like hundreds and hundreds more that aren't on there, and they don't really care because they don't know necessarily what they were doing, like what they were contributing to, right? Like so yeah, it's tough. And it just kind of fosters that narrative that like, these small studios, the quote small studios are doing all these things when, and vastly underestimating just how much work and how much manpower it takes to get any game out the door, right?
yeah,
So
and like bringing like a bit of the Japanese perspective, I have friends who work at Square Enix and like other studios in Japan, and one of the policies in Japan, like that a lot of companies adopt, is that you only get your name on the credits if you are in the studio once the project ends. So if you look at something like, let's say, Final Fantasy 15, which
right.
spent like almost a decade in development, so many people work on that game and like work on the not only like let's say the early cancel versions, but even on the final shipped version, that their game names are not on the credit because let's say the final build took, let's say, 6 years to make. They work on it for 5 years and they left in the last year because of some personal reasons. Their name
Right.
is not on the credits. So the amount of people that take to make some of those games, we honestly don't know because the companies don't share like officially how many people are involved. So
Yeah.
it's really hard for us to get a grasp of like how many people take to make a game. Like I just opened now the Oblivion credits because I want to confirm this.
Yeah.
If you go to the Oblivion remastered credits, the full list on Moby Games is 2,178 people. 2,000
Wow.
people credit on the game. It's like insane, like amount of people, and most of them are like outsource art people, make usually with Asian names. So it's like from Virtual Studio. It's so many names that like it's just the people who are not usually credited. So like credit to Bethesda to actually writing the name of everyone,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so many
It's
other
good.
studios have the same source of like the same kind of numbers behind them, but they just don't share it.
Yeah. And that's, man, that is a messed up policy for a number of reasons, but not the least of which being like if you're if you're tenured in the industry, like if you're familiar with kind of like the ebbs and flows of game development, you know that the best time for you to exit is right before release, right? Or like, the last like maybe 6 to 9 months before ship because, you know, uh you've done a lot of the work. It's gotten very close. Like maybe it's even getting close to gold or whatever. But like, and you want to use the work that you've done if you aren't going to change studios, right? Like you can use the work that you contributed to a main line title like Final Fantasy 15 to get hopefully a better job, right? Maybe more a senior job at another studio, or pursuing if you decide to go work for an indie studio or whatever. And so the idea that if you're not like in the doors, and I know I'm sure it's not like the day, right? Because they draft the credits sometime before release, but even still, like if you're not up there pretty much right until the finish line, that you're not including the credits, I feel like that definitely you definitely miss out on quite a few
Yeah, yeah, and it's quite
talents. Yeah.
it's quite intentional because um, people talk a lot about like Japan has like very strong worker rights, and it has to a point. So like
Mm,
if you are like say Shine, which is like a let's say a permanent employee of the company, it's almost impossible to fire you. But
mm,
a lot of those people are like contract workers, and they know that the moment that their contract ends, they simply don't renew it. So it doesn't count as being fired. They're just people who don't get their contract renewed. And as you
right.
say, they know that the moment I say you ship a game, a lot of those contracts are not going to get renewed because they have to like slow down and go into pre-production of the next game.
Yeah,
So
they have to
it's the
figure out what they're doing. Yeah,
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 it's the perfect time for you to like you're going to start looking for a job because you know you're going to be out of job soon. But if you leave early, you don't get your name on the credits. So it's really a mess.
yeah, yeah. Well, anyways, I really appreciate you, Felipe, taking some time talking about the CRPG book, giving some insights on on these kind of movements in the industry, and insights from Japan, etc. Before we wrap up, what are you working on next? Like, what can people be looking forward to from you, or
I
where can
have
they find your work?
you can find my work on Blue Sky now. I left Twitter. You can find as like Felipe Pepe, everything together. So like 3PE.
Hmm.
And my next work is something that I've been like building slowly. That after all the discoveries of the working on the CRPG book about video games across the world and how there's so much that we don't know about, I want my next project to be about that. So I'm working on like a book that tries to get a bit of insight of like how it was as a there's a bunch of scenes that we don't talk about that I really enjoy exploring. Like in mainland China in the 90s, they had a whole scene about around MUDs and early online RPGs developing. That
Mm,
is like so fascinating, and it led later to the rise of like online gaming there. I want to explore that kind of stuff, So like how was online gaming in mainland China in the 90s? How was, let's say, the scene about online RPGs in Russia in the 2000s? There's a bunch of little scenes like this that I want to explore, like the culture about flash games in Chile in the 2000s. I want to try to make like an anthology of like people writing, local people, of course, that were part of that culture, writing about those individual scenes and collect them together. So that has been the next project. Is still like very early, but it's something that hopefully, I don't know, 2 3 years is something that I can publish.
yeah. That's awesome. I mean, it's a pretty short window compared to like video game development. Like 2 to 3 years. That's fast.
Yeah,
Video games these days take like 7 to 8 years to get out into the
yeah.
market.
I
So
say this because when I began the CRPG book, I thought I was going to close it in like, oh, in 6 months I can do this, and I
oh
spent the next 9 years working on it. So
yeah, that sounds like AAA. That sounds
yeah,
like a
so
AAA development window. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again, Felipe, for joining us. And thank you all for joining us on this epic quest through all things geek. If you enjoyed this episode of GG Everybody, be sure to hit follow, leave a review, share it with your fellow fans. If you've got a topic or a hot take that you would like to share with us, or a guest that you'd like us to have on, feel free to slide into our DMs on Blue Sky or email us at contact@thegeeklygrind.com. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, may your rolls be natural 20s, your loot be legendary, and your save points never too far away. GG, everybody.